Not all American cars were simply discontinued. Some were so problematic, dangerous, or controversial that they were effectively banned through recalls, legal action, or regulatory pressure. These vehicles were more than just bad ideas. They became scandals. Automakers tried to sweep them under the rug, but history hasn't forgotten. These 9 banned American cars were silenced, censored, and erased, and here's why they want you to forget them.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 9. In the late 1960s, muscle car competition wasn't just a matter of bragging rights on the street. It was about winning races on Sunday to sell cars on Monday. No model better embodied this ethos than the 1968 Chevrolet Camaro Z/28, a purpose-built homologation special for the SCCA Trans Am series. But deep within Chevrolet's performance catalog was an even wilder option, one not factory-installed, but dealer-offered and track-proven, the Cross-Ram induction system. A visually striking, high-revving setup, the Cross-Ram took the Z/28 from aggressive to outrageous, and then vanished quickly under the weight of emissions laws and government scrutiny. The Z/28 option code, introduced in 1967, was created specifically for SCCA Trans Am homologation, which limited engine displacement to 5.0 liters, 305 cubic inch displacement. Chevrolet responded with a 302 cubic inch V8 from a 327 crank in a 283 block. High revving performance over 7,000 RPM potential. Solid lifters, 11.0 to 1 ratio, 1 compression, and a Holley 780 CFM carb. The Z/28 was never about straight-line drag strip muscle. It was road course precision, and Chevrolet's answer to the Mustang Boss 302. In 1967 and 1968, the Z/28 wasn't heavily advertised. You had to know what to ask for, but for performance purists and racers, it was a gem. The Cross-Ram intake was a dealer-installed over-the-counter option designed for race applications, introduced in late 1968. Dual Holley 429 4-barrel carburetors mounted sideways. Aluminum high-rise intake manifold with long, equal-length runners, meant to enhance high RPM breathing and throttle response. Estimated power gains, up to 40-plus horsepower, pushing the 302 toward 400 horsepower territory unofficially. The intake runners crossed over the engine, hence Cross-Ram, and required modifications to the hood, including a cowl or cutout. This system was built for serious competition. It helped Chevrolet Z28s dominate in Trans Am racing with better high RPM airflow and top-end power. It was ill-suited to daily driving. It ran rich at low RPMs, bogged down in traffic, and required precise tuning. Starting in 1968, the U.S. federal government implemented new emissions regulations that required positive crankcase ventilation, PCV systems, cleaner burning induction systems, tighter control on carburation and fuel delivery, sound dampening, and exhaust restrictions. The Cross-Ram setup lacked proper emissions equipment, including PCV integration and the ability to control air-fuel ratios at idle and cruising speeds. EB, noise and drivability. The system created induction roar, a loud growling intake sound that exceeded noise limits in some jurisdictions. It ran poorly at low RPM, violated idle emission standards, and was considered unsuitable for street driving. Chevrolet themselves warned customers, "This unit is intended for off-highway use only." By early 1969, dealerships were discouraged from installing Cross-Ram intakes on street cars. It was relegated to track-only use, and production numbers were very limited. Only about 600 Cross-Ram manifolds were produced in total. Most went to race teams or serious enthusiasts. Fewer than 200 actual cars are believed to have been fitted with it during the period. The Cross-Ram intake became one of the most iconic underhood sights in muscle car history. Today, it's a collector's holy grail and brings huge value to any surviving Z28 that has it. On the track, the system delivered 10 to 15% more horsepower at high RPM, improved throttle response at full load. A distinct edge in road racing, but on the street, it was temperamental, loud and raw. Exactly the sort of performance that emissions and safety regulators were determined to eliminate. By 1969, the Cross-Ram intake was all but banned for street use, didn't meet idle or part throttle emissions, violated noise standards in several states, didn't comply with EPA carburetor certification. Chevrolet didn't offer it in any official production Z28s. It became a footnote in brochures and a tool for racers only. By 1970, the performance era was already under siege. Emissions controls, insurance hikes, and rising gas prices combined to kill off this kind of extreme, street-ready innovation. The 1968 Chevrolet Camaro Z/28 with Cross-Ram induction was never meant to be tame. It was Chevrolet's ultimate wink to the racing crowd, a system that pushed small block engineering to its mechanical limits. But it was also a casualty of its time. As regulators stepped in to clean up the streets, both in terms of pollution and noise, there was no room left for something so raw and uncompromising. Today, the Cross-Ram Z/28 is remembered not just as a muscle car, but as a symbol of the brief, glorious moment when the line between street and track blurred, and engineers were still allowed to chase performance first. Number 8. When it debuted in 1984, the Pontiac Fiero promised to revolutionize the American car landscape. It was GM's first mid-engine production car, a sleek two-seater aimed at young buyers and import fans. But instead of changing the game, the Fiero's early run, especially the 1984 model powered by the Iron Duke 2.5-liter inline-4, became infamous for engine fires, recalls, and public distrust. This lecture will explore how ambition, poor planning, and rushed development turned a pioneering vehicle into a public relations nightmare. Pontiac envisioned the Fiero as a commuter sports car, economical but sporty, lightweight and affordable, targeting younger buyers. A space frame vehicle using a steel substructure with bolt-on plastic body panels. America's first mass-produced mid-engine car. Though it looked like a mini Corvette, the original Fiero was designed for economy first, not performance. To maximize fuel economy, Pontiac chose GM's aging 2.5-liter Iron Duke 4-cylinder engine, producing only 92 horsepower point 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 11 seconds, mated to either a 4-speed manual or 3-speed automatic. The engine, a durable workhorse in other GM models, was never meant to live in a cramped mid-engine compartment, and therein lay the problem. The 1984 Fiero's Iron Duke was plagued by poor oil circulation and narrow oil passages. Engines that would burn oil quickly, sometimes without warning. Drivers unaware that their oil levels were low until the engine seized or ignited. Poorly designed connecting rods that threw through the engine block, spilling oil onto the hot exhaust manifold. The result? Fires. Lots of them. By 1987, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, received hundreds of complaints. It was estimated that at least 260 Fieros caught fire, mostly from the 1984 model year. Some reports suggested fire rates as high as 1 in 500 cars. This wasn't just a reliability problem. It became a public safety crisis. Initially, GM downplayed the fire risk, but growing media attention and pressure from regulators forced their hand. In 1988, 4 years after the problem began, GM issued a massive recall, covered over 125,000 Fieros from the 1984 model year. The recall involved installing new connecting rods, upgrading engine oiling systems, updating dipsticks and instructions to monitor oil more frequently. It was too little, too late for the Fiero's reputation. News headlines called it the Fire O. Insurance companies hiked rates or refused to cover early models. Resale values plummeted. GM was accused of knowing about the defects and delaying action to save money. The car was never banned, but it was effectively blacklisted by cautious buyers. The 2.5-liter Iron Duke had a solid reputation in front-engine applications, like the Chevy Citation or Pontiac Phoenix. But its adaptation to a mid-engine layout was never fully engineered. Cooling issues due to limited airflow, oil sloshing, and starvation in tight corners. No oil level sensor in a car that burned oil rapidly. This wasn't just poor execution. It was a dangerous mismatch of technology and layout. Engineering shortcuts don't save reputation. GM had initially hoped the Fiero would grow into a true sports car with a V6 and improved handling, but the reliability scandal stole its thunder. B. The Fiero did improve. Later models, 1985 to 1988, added a V6 engine. Suspension and brake improvements turned it into a real performer. But the 1984 model's fire stigma never faded. By 1988, the Fiero was canceled. Ironically, just as it became good. Surviving 1984 Fieros are rare. Many were scrapped or burned. Later models, especially the 1988 GT, are now cult favorites. The Fiero has become a case study in how not to launch a car. And while it was never banned, the damage done by the early Iron Duke fires meant dealers and buyers treated it like a liability. The 1984 Pontiac Fiero Iron Duke should have been a hero, an American-built, innovative, space-age sports car. Instead, it became a rolling fire hazard, its potential consumed by literal and figurative flames. GM's delay in addressing obvious problems, combined with poor engineering choices, turned a revolutionary idea into a tragic punchline. Today, the early Fiero stands as a reminder that rushing to market without thorough testing, especially in a new layout, can backfire spectacularly. Number 7. In the golden age of muscle cars, Ford's 429 Cobra jet engine represented brute force, massive displacement, raw torque, and a sound that shook windows. Housed in the 1971 Torino Cobra, it was the pinnacle of Ford's big block engineering. But that same year, government regulations began closing the door on such muscle monsters. The 429 Cobra jet's disappearance after 1971 wasn't just a model year update. It was the end of big block dominance, a casualty of emissions laws, insurance hikes, and federal mandates. The Ford Torino began as a Fairlane trim level in 1968, but by 1970 to 71, it had become its own full-fledged model. The Torino Cobra was the most aggressive version, aimed squarely at the muscle car crowd, stripped down for speed, available with high-horsepower big blocks, intended to compete with Mopar's Roadrunner and GM's Chevelle SS.B. 1971, Torino Cobra, performance in a new shell. The 1971 Torino Cobra was restyled with a wide fastback body, available only as a two-door sports roof. Light on trim but heavy on muscle, it was marketed as a no-nonsense street warrior, but its most powerful engine would be short-lived. The 429 cubic-inch 7.0-liter engine was Ford's replacement for the 427 and 428 Cobra Jet. 429 Cobra Jet, CJ, rated at 370 horsepower, 450 pound-feet of torque, 0.4 barrel carb, high lift camshaft, and large valve heads. 0.249, Super Cobra Jet SC Joey. Same advertised horsepower, but stronger internal solid lifters, oil cooler 780 CFM Holley carb, designed for drag strip domination. Both engines were underrated on paper to keep insurance costs down. Actual output often exceeded 400 plus horsepower. The 429 CJ equipped Torino could do 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds, quarter mile in the 13 to 14 second range, top speeds around 130 miles per hour. This was serious speed for a full-size muscle car and came at a time when speed was about to become a liability. By 1971, several forces aligned to kill the big block party. Federal emissions regulations demanded lower NOx, CO, and unburned hydrocarbon levels. The EPA began mandating lower compression ratios and cleaner combustion. Insurance companies drastically raised rates on cars with big displacement engines. States like California began banning or restricting high-compression big blocks, dropping compression from 11.3 to 1 to 10.6 to 1.1 or lower, using retarded cam timing and smaller carburetors, switching from gross horsepower to net horsepower ratings to meet upcoming 1972 standards. The result? Power ratings fell and customer interest followed. The 429 Cobra Jet and SCJ were discontinued. The 1972 Torino Cobra was gone, replaced by the Gran Torino Sport, a tamer GT-like model. Ford pivoted toward luxury and appearance packages. Think vinyl roofs, rally stripes, and plush interiors over performance. The 429 engine itself lived on in police cars, trucks, and Lincolns, but in neutered, low-compression form. Muscle car versions were dead. The 1971 Torino Cobra with 429 CJ/SCJ is extremely rare. Only 3,054 Cobra models were produced for 1971. Just a fraction had the 429 Super Cobra Jet Drag Pack. Survivors are prized by collectors today, often fetching high prices at auctions. While Mustangs and Chevelle grabbed the spotlight, the Torino Cobra was more underground muscle. Fewer made, less hyped, but every bit as fast. Its disappearance in 1971 makes it a symbol of the muscle car era's abrupt collapse. The death of the 429 CJ marked a generational shift, from brute power to regulated efficiency, from factory performance to aftermarket tuning, from high-octane thrills to government oversight. The 1971 Torino Cobra wasn't banned by name, but its engine was legislated out of existence. The 1971 Ford Torino Cobra Jet 429 was both a high point and a swan song. It offered massive, raw power at a moment when that kind of performance was being labeled socially irresponsible, environmentally harmful, and economically reckless. In the years that followed, muscle cars grew weaker, heavier, and quieter. The Cobra Jet 429 didn't just disappear, it was a sacrifice to the altar of emissions control. But for one brief moment in 1971, Ford's big block dreams burned as bright as ever, and then were gone. Number 6, the Oldsmobile. 442 is typically remembered as a muscle coupe or convertible, especially in its golden years from 1968 to 1972. But lurking in the shadows of official production records are stories of dealer-built 442 W30 sedans, particularly in 1973. Models never sanctioned by General Motors, but assembled using factory parts for favored customers. These rare, possibly mythical builds flew in the face of GM's own policies and federal emission certification standards and were ultimately shut down by corporate order. By 1973, the 442 was no longer a standalone model, but rather an appearance and performance option on the Cutlass S. Traditionally a two-door coupe, it included a dual exhaust, sport suspension, rally instrumentation, tattoo stripes, and unique badging. The W30 was Oldsmobile's top-tier performance upgrade, featuring a higher compression 455 V8, performance camshaft, special heads intake and carburation, functional cold air induction, beefed-up suspension and rear axle. The W30 was still available in 1973, but only on coupes. GM never authorized it on four-door sedans. A small number of Oldsmobile dealerships, particularly in the Midwest, are rumored to have installed the full W30 engine and suspension components into Cutlass Supreme or Cutlass Salon sedans, badged them as 442s, and sold them to customers. These dealer-built cars, often use genuine factory parts, were not listed in official Oldsmobile order guides, violated GM's federal emissions and safety certifications, which were tied to specific body styles. Why would a dealer build a 442 W30 sedan? Customer demand. Some buyers wanted muscle in a sleeper body, or needed a family car that could still perform. Inventory creativity. Dealerships often had parts or leftover W30 components and wanted to move them. Performance loyalty. 1973 was the first year of detuned emissions-compliant engines, and enthusiasts were scrambling to keep power alive. Every car GM officially sold had to meet federal emissions and safety standards as certified by the EPA and NHTSA. These certifications were specific to model year. Body style. Engine and drivetrain combo. Dealership installed a W3455 into a four-door sedan. They were effectively selling a vehicle that had never been tested or certified in that configuration, that could fail emissions inspections, that exposed GM to legal liability, even if unofficial. When GM discovered some dealers were performing these conversions, they issued a corporate bulletin ordering the practice to stop. Dealerships were reminded they could lose their franchise license for unauthorized builds. Factory support for W30 parts was tightened and tracked. From GM's perspective, even if customers were happy, these builds jeopardized compliance and threatened federal scrutiny. No official numbers exist, since these were dealer or individual builds. Most experts believe fewer than 25 true W30 sedans were ever constructed this way. Survivors, if any, are hard to prove without build sheets, dealer records, or VINs that align with engine codes. These rogue sedans represent the last gasps of muscle car creativity before emissions and insurance strangled performance. A unique subculture of performance enthusiasts working around corporate limits, the blurring lines between factory dealer and owner-modified performance. They are akin to the Yenko Camaros or Baldwin Motion Chevys, but on a much quieter, less glamorous scale, often built for practical dads who didn't want to give up speed. The 1973 dealer-built 442 W30 sedan shows how loopholes in dealer autonomy shaped early performance culture, the tension between regulation and enthusiast demand, how federal rules, not customer desire, ultimately dictated what Detroit could build. It also illustrates how GM, once a builder of brute force performance cars, transitioned reluctantly into the emissions era, leaving behind legendary names like W30 and 442 to be reduced to stickers and trim. The 1973 Oldsmobile 442 W30 sedan was never supposed to exist. And yet, in the corners of GM's dealership network, it did. Crafted by loyal performance enthusiasts in defiance of federal policy and corporate restraint, it became a rebellious footnote to the muscle car story. Today, any surviving example, if verified, would be one of the rarest Oldsmobiles ever built and a true unicorn of automotive history. Number 5. By the late 1970s, the American muscle car was on life support, strangled by emissions regulations, rising insurance costs, and shifting market priorities. Nowhere was this more apparent than in California, whose air quality laws were the strictest in the country. In 1979, California delivered a final blow to Pontiac's big block legacy by banning the 400 cubic inch V8. This meant the end of the true Trans Am muscle era for buyers in the Golden State, even as the rest of the country still had a taste of the past. The Pontiac 400 V8 had been in service since the 1967 GTO and was synonymous with high torque output, durable construction, a broad RPM power band. Factory ratings up to 370 horsepower in the late 60s. Gross, though detuned over time, it remained Pontiac's signature performance motor into the late 70s. By 1979, the Trans Am had become one of the last muscle cars standing aggressive styling with shaker hoods, spoilers, and screaming chicken decals. 4-speed manual available with the TA 6.6-liter 400 cubic inch real link to the golden muscle car era. And California was about to sever it. California's Air Resources Board, CARB, had stricter emission standards than the federal government. Earlier adoption of catalytic converters, tighter limits on NOx, HC, and CO emissions, higher compliance costs for automakers. CARB required individual certification for each engine-body combination. If an engine couldn't meet California's limits, even if it passed federally, it was banned from being sold new in the state. Still used pre-1975 emissions technology, like secondary air injection and EGR, was based on an older architecture not easily adapted to California standards, had no catalytic converter, and couldn't be retrofitted cost-effectively. Rather than spend money to redesign it for California, GM made the decision. No more 400s for California Trans Ams in 1979. If you bought a 1979 Trans Am, your engine depended on your zip code. Engine availability output, net HP, transmission T, a 6.6, 400 V8, 49 state, only 220 horsepower, 4-speed manual, only 0.66 liter, 403 Oldsmobile Vibe 8. California, only 185 horsepower, 3-speed automatic only. More torque, manual shifting fun, better quarter-mile times, 15 seconds. 403 Olds V8. Weaker, more emissions-friendly, mandatory automatic transmission, slower and heavier. California buyers were forced to accept the looks without the guts. Muscle car fans in California were furious. No manual transmission, less performance. A Trans Am in name only. Dealers tried to ease the blow with marketing spin, same style, cleaner burn, but enthusiasts knew the difference. Some buyers responded by importing 49 state cars, swapping in 400 engines post-purchase, registering out-of-state vehicles to avoid smog testing. The 403 cars became known as California cars, a euphemism for weaker performance. Pontiac stopped producing the 400 V8 in 1978. A small stockpile of hand-built 4s was reserved for the 1979 Trans Am. These engines were used only with 4-speed cars, making them extremely collectible today. Once the stockpile ran out, that was it. No more 4s, 100s, ever be. Trans Am in the 1980s, the Trans Am transitioned to 301 V8s, turbocharging, and eventually small displacement motors. The muscle era was over. The 400 became the last true big block Trans Am engine. Only about 8,000 units were built with the 400 and 4-speed. None were shipped to California. Today, these are among the most valuable second-gen Trans Ams .B 403 California cars. Far more common, but less desirable, often overlooked by collectors. Still a piece of muscle car history, albeit the declawed version, the 1979 Pontiac Trans Am 400 was more than a car. It was the final gasp of Pontiac's muscle legacy, undone by the tightest emission rules in the country. In California, buyers got the same styling, but lost the soul. That ban symbolized the larger collapse of muscle car power in the face of regulation. Pontiac's 400 was built for freedom and force, but California's laws required restraint and refinement, and so the West Coast lost access to the last true American muscle heartbeat, all in the name of cleaner air. Number 4. In the mid-20th century, few vehicles symbolized American suburbia more than the Ford Country Squire. With its wood grain paneling, cavernous interior, and V8 power, it was the ultimate family hauler, especially in its top configuration with the monstrous 460 cubic inch V8. But in 1975, something changed. In California, where the smog hung thick in clean air was becoming a political mandate, this big-engine version of Ford's flagship wagon was effectively banned from sale. It failed to meet the state's increasingly strict emissions laws. Let's explore how this happened, why it mattered, and what it symbolized for the muscle-era survivors of the Country Squire was introduced in the 1950s. It became Ford's flagship full-size wagon, famous for simulated wood siding, seating for up to 9 passengers, big block power options for effortless cruising. By the 1970s, the Country Squire was built on the Ford LTD platform, a full-size body-on-frame design with luxury appointments and brute force under the hood. By the early 70s, the Country Squire could be ordered with 460 cubic inch 7.5-liter V8. Originally developed for Lincoln in 1968, rated at 220 to 245 net horsepower in 1975, depending on tune, known for mountain-moving torque, high fuel consumption, poor emissions performance. This engine was ideal for long road trips, trailer towing, or simply commanding the road, but it had a problem: smog. The California Air Resources Board, CARB, was the first regulatory agency in the U.S. to enforce automotive emissions limits. In fact, California had stricter rules than the federal government, and automakers had to certify each engine-body combo separately for the state. The federal government required catalytic converters on nearly all new vehicles starting in 1975. California's standards were even tougher, especially for big displacement engines like the 460 V8 engines were either detuned severely or dropped entirely from California-bound vehicles. Ford's 460 V8 in the Country Squire could not meet CARB standards that year. The result? The 460 was a carryover big block design that relied on brute displacement rather than efficiency. To pass California emissions, it would have needed a catalytic converter, revised ignition timing, lean burn calibration, possibly even exhaust gas recirculation, EGR, and air injection systems. But by 1975, retrofitting the 460 to meet CARB standards wasn't economically feasible for Ford. especially for a low-demand, high-consumption vehicle like a big wagon. B. Fuel economy headaches. The 460-powered Country Squire averaged 8 to 10 miles per gallon at best. With gasoline over $1 per gallon in many areas and rationing memories still fresh from the 1973 oil crisis, regulators saw it as irresponsible overkill. For decades, big wagons like the Country Squire had been a badge of middle-class prestige. The loss of the 460 option signaled a new era, one where even family cars had to get leaner, slower, and greener. Enthusiasts and trailer towing customers in California were dismayed. Without the 460, heavy wagons felt underpowered. Interstate passing became a chore. Fuel economy improved only marginally. Some customers went out of state to buy the 460 equipped version, and gray market registered it back home. It showed that California emissions laws were reshaping the entire industry. Other states soon followed California's lead. Big blocks would disappear from passenger cars entirely by the early 1980s. B. The rarity factor. A 1975 Country Squire with a 460 V8 is now very rare, especially in surviving condition outside of California. California models with only smaller engines are less collectible, but they represent the regulatory shift in real time. The 1975 Ford Country Squire with the 460 V8 was an icon of American excess, but one that couldn't escape the tightening grip of environmental regulation. California's ban on the 460 was a quiet but decisive moment, the moment when family muscle cars were no longer welcome on the West Coast. While 460-equipped wagons would return in later years with cleaner emissions, they would never again feel as raw, effortless, or unapologetic. In 1975, the battle between Detroit horsepower and California air was in full swing, and in this case, California won. Number 3, the 1969 Dodge Charger RT with the 426 Hemi was one of the most powerful, aggressive, and iconic muscle cars ever built. Its styling became immortalized by pop culture, and its performance was near unbeatable on the street and strip. But while the government didn't ban this beast, another force did: the insurance industry. By the end of the 1960s, owning a Hemi car wasn't a matter of horsepower. It was a matter of economics. Insurers refused to cover them or charge astronomical premiums, making them unaffordable to all but the wealthiest and often oldest enthusiasts. It was a death sentence for muscle car performance at the consumer level. The 426 Hemi, nicknamed the Elephant, featured 426 cubic inches, 7.0 liters, 425 horsepower, gross, massive dual-quad carburetors, forged internals, aluminum heads, and high-lift camshafts. Designed originally for NASCAR, it was race-proven, bulletproof, and terrifyingly fast in the right hands. For 1969, the Charger RT road track included standard 440 Magnum by 8 HEMI optional, heavy-duty suspension and brakes, unique badging and styling touches, optional 4-speed manual or 3-speed automatic. Adding the HEMI turned this already aggressive car into a drag strip monster. By 1969, nearly every American manufacturer was cranking out high-horsepower machines, often at bargain prices. Teenagers could buy a 400-plus horsepower car with no driving experience, bias-ply tires, drum brakes, no traction control or ABS. This led to a spike in accidents, fatalities, and claims, creating high-risk categories based on horsepower-to-weight ratios, charging exorbitant premiums for performance models, often refusing coverage entirely for cars with specific engine codes, like the 426 HEMI. By 1970, the HEMI wasn't banned by the government, but it might as well have been, because no one under 25 could afford to insure it. A. The beginning of muscle car decline. Insurance restrictions led to buyers opting for 383 or 440-powered cars instead, manufacturers shifting to insurance-proof muscle, like the GTO's Ram Air 360 horsepower, disguised as 350. The rise of performance appearance packages without real power, think 1971 Mustang Mach-1 with a 360 horsepower engine. 302. The era of big block street cars was fading. Some lied on applications about engine size. Others registered the car under a parent's name. Sleepers became more common, Base models with hidden big blocks, but none of this stopped the larger shift away from factory-delivered, ultra-high performance cars. Back in the day, the Hemi Charger was a headache to own, hard to insure, expensive to feed, and difficult to tame. Today, they are million-dollar collectibles due to extreme rarity, legendary performance, pop culture appeal, helped by the Dukes of Hazzard and Fast and Furious. The Hemi was never banned by the EPA, DOT, or NHTSA, but insurance restrictions made it unreachable, a form of market censorship that was just as effective. It was the first major sign that the muscle car era was unsustainable, not just from a regulatory standpoint, but economically. The 1969 Dodge Charger RT Hemi remains a legend not just for its performance, but for the power it symbolized and the power it lost to insurance politics. The 426 Hemi didn't die in a crash or get banned by the government. It was choked out by premium tables, actuarial data, and cold economic math. In that way, the Charger RT-HEMI is the perfect emblem of muscle car excess, brought down not by law but by liability. Number 2. In 1977, Chevrolet launched a redesigned Caprice, downsized, sleeker, and more efficient than its 1976 predecessor. But while the civilian version was aimed at comfort and economy, Chevrolet quietly built something wild for police departments, the Caprice 9C1. This version of the Caprice was loaded with performance equipment not available to the general public. Designed strictly for law enforcement use, the 9C1 was a muscle car in uniform. And because it didn't meet certain emissions and certification requirements for public sale, it was never offered to civilians, effectively making it a forbidden factory hot rod. 1977 marked a dramatic shift for General Motors. The Caprice, like other full-size GM cars, was 7 inches shorter, 900 pounds lighter, improved in fuel economy, interior space, and handling. While the civilian model focused on being a comfortable, respectable family sedan, it also opened new performance possibilities thanks to its lighter platform. Despite the shift toward efficiency, law enforcement still demanded high performance. High-speed pursuits, heavy-duty durability, enhanced cooling, braking, and acceleration. Chevrolet responded with the 9C1 package, a fleet-only performance option built to meet the rigors of police work, not dealership regulations. While civilian Caprices had small V8s like the 305 or emissions-choked 350, the 9C1 could be ordered with 350C ID, 4-barrel V8L, 82 variant shared DNA with Corvette parts, possibly 400 CID small block in extremely limited use depending on region and fuel requirements. These engines had higher compression, less restrictive exhaust, and more aggressive timing curves, leading to performance levels well beyond civilian Caprices. Heavy-duty suspension with upgraded shocks, springs, and sway bars. Larger radiator and high-capacity cooling system, HD brakes and steel wheels. Certified calibration speedometers up to 140 miles per hour. No emission-conforming catalytic converters in some versions, depending on regional exemptions. This was a purpose-built pursuit car, faster, tougher, and better handling than anything a civilian could walk into a showroom and buy. The 9C1 was built to pursuit spec standards, but not public regulatory standards. Some 9C1s lacked fully certified emissions equipment, especially in non-CARB states. Others bypassed noise or safety regulations that applied to public passenger cars. GM could legally sell them to government fleets, but not to private customers. They were, in essence, legal street cars that were illegal to sell to you. GM also avoided offering 9C1s to the public due to liability concerns. Selling a police-grade car to civilians invited potential lawsuits if misused. Image control. Chevrolet didn't want lawsuits stemming from drivers street racing in factory-backed cars. Market segmentation. They wanted to preserve the Caprice's image as a comfortable, respectable full-size sedan. Although the traditional muscle car era was dead by 1977, the Caprice 9C1 quietly carried the torch. With the right engine, it could do 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 8 seconds. Extremely quick for the era. It was a sleeper in every sense. Plain styling, heavy-duty underpinnings, and legit highway speed. Many enthusiasts who drove them as police officers remembered them fondly as the last real muscle cars they ever used on duty. B. Influence on future performance sedans. The 9C1 program evolved into 90s Caprice, 9C1 with L, T1 Corvette engines, 2000s, Impala 9C1, and later Chevy's rebadged Caprice PPV based on the Australian Holden Commodore. All trace their roots to the 1977 program, the year GM realized cops needed muscle, even if civilians couldn't have it. Because the 9C1 was fleet-only, few survived. Most were heavily used, abused, and eventually crushed. Those that were auctioned off were often missing their pursuit parts. Original 1977 9. C1S in full pursuit spec are extremely rare today, and yet they represent one of the most interesting footnotes in muscle car history, an era when performance had gone underground into government-only channels. The 1977 Chevrolet Caprice 9C1 is a fascinating case of post-muscle era engineering, where the power still existed, but it was hidden behind fleet order codes and not available to the public. More than just a fast car, it was a strategic loophole, a way for GM to keep its performance legacy alive during a time of smog controls, downsizing, and federal red tape. It's the muscle car that wore a badge, not a stripe.
Number 1. By 1978, the golden era of American muscle was long gone. Performance cars had been neutered by federal emissions regulations, rising insurance costs, and the OPEC oil crises. But that didn't stop Chrysler from trying. Enter the 1978 Plymouth Volare Super Coupe, a rare attempt to build a street-legal muscle car using police-spec hardware tucked inside the body of Plymouth's compact Volare. It was built for performance-minded drivers and Mopar loyalists, offering a 360 V8, heavy-duty parts, and unique styling. But emissions regulations, especially in California, spelled doom for this one-year-only oddball. Introduced in 1976 to replace the aging Valiant, the Plymouth Volare was a compact sedan, coupe, and wagon based on Chrysler's F-body platform. It was light and fuel-efficient, by late 70s standards, popular with families and fleet buyers. Never originally intended as a muscle car platform, but Chrysler saw potential to inject life into the Volare lineup with a limited-run performance variant. Muscle cars had weakened engines due to emissions. California Air Resources. Board CARB rules were stricter than federal guidelines. Performance names were being reused with no real performance. Chrysler, struggling to retain its once fierce muscle image, attempted a revival through the Super Coupe. At the heart of the Super Coupe was the E58 Police Spec 360 cubic inch V8, which was rated at 195 horsepower SAE net. Very respectable for 1978. Paired with a TorqueFlite 3-speed automatic transmission. Tuned similarly to the Dodge Aspen RT and Chrysler Police Interceptors. It wasn't a Hemi, but for the smog era, it had real performance chops. Or B. Chassis and suspension upgrades. To handle the extra power, Chrysler equipped the Super Coupe with heavy-duty shocks, springs, and sway bars, police-spec cooling systems and brakes. By 7 rally wheels with G60 tires, unusually wide for the time. These parts were overkill for a compact, but gave the Volare serious handling and durability. Unique styling cues set the Super Coupe apart. Matte black hoods with Super Coupe decals, body side stripes and blackout grille, louvers over the rear quarter windows, leather-wrapped steering wheel and sporty seats. It looked the part, aggressive and purposeful, especially in an era of neutered coupes with fake vents and plastic chrome. The E58 Police Spec 360 V8, used in the Super Coupe, failed California's emission standards, CARB, was not certified for sale in several states due to smog controls, lacked the full catalytic converter/smog pump configurations found on lower-power civilian V8s. This meant the Super Coupe was not legal for sale in California, which at the time accounted for a huge percentage of U.S. car sales. Low sales, Certification hurdles. Chrysler's financial woes. The Super Coupe was canceled after a single model year, 1978 only. No 1979 version was ever offered, and no major updates were attempted. Production numbers were low. Estimates suggest fewer than 500 Super Coupes were built, with even fewer surviving today. The Volare Super Coupe was one of the last factory Mopars to use the 360 V8 in a semi-muscle application. It's a unique intersection of muscle car aesthetics, police car hardware, a compact, economy-minded platform. Because it was only sold for 1 year, and not in major markets like California, it remained virtually unknown, even among Chrysler fans. Extremely rare. Valued for its oddity more than outright performance. Remembered mostly by Mopar diehards. It represents a transitional moment when manufacturers still tried to channel muscle heritage into smog-era platforms, even if the regulations made it nearly impossible. The 1978 Plymouth Volare Super Coupe was a bold idea at the wrong time. It had the parts, the performance, and the styling. But regulatory red tape, especially in California, made it unsustainable. It's now a relic of Chrysler's late 1970s identity crisis, trying to be muscle while surviving in a world that no longer wanted it.